Amnesty International calls out shameless double standards on universal human rights. While much of the world rallied around Ukraine, other human rights atrocities were ignored. We'll talk to Amnesty's Secretary General about their annual report and ask if a better global balance can be found. Also on the program, a look at the protests in Kenya. Are they really about the rising cost of living, or is this a political move to destabilize the government? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is The Newsmakers. Amnesty International has just released its annual report for 2022, assessing the state of human rights in 156 countries. This year, it highlights double standards around the world and the failure of the international community to unite around universal values. The broad-reaching report examines the war in Ukraine and the West's response to Russian aggression. It shows how women's rights and freedom to protest are severely under threat. It found that 43% of countries have introduced new laws to stop peaceful protests, while 55% have used excessive or unnecessary force against demonstrators. And as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights turns 75, it touches on whether these rights really are universal or if they only apply to some. In reflecting on this report, the Amnesty International Italy General Director spoke about the global refugee crisis.
We have welcomed, and rightfully so, refugees fleeing from Ukraine. But unfortunately, there was a double standard policy, as Emmanuel and Ricardo have also said. We did welcome refugees from Ukraine, again, rightfully, but we didn't have the same approach towards other refugees and migrants that we often left dying in the Mediterranean.
So can those double standards be corrected, or are they a product of an increasingly divided planet where governments exclusively protect their own so-called interests? Joining me now to discuss that from Geneva is Agnes Callamard. She's Amnesty International's Secretary General. Thanks so much for being with us. You know, there's so much in this report, much of it obviously quite disturbing, but was there anything that actually surprised you, given how we've seen leaders turn inward over the past decade in particular?
I think what surprised me in 2022, even though we witness it throughout the year, is the fact that unlike previous years, at least in 2022, we have an idea of what could be done. We have a blueprint for an international value-based response to an attack on the people of Ukraine and an attack on the UN Charter. We had not seen such a number of reactions to these attacks that could be a blueprint, could be a model. We saw global condemnations, investigation of crimes by the ICC, indictment. 2 weeks ago, we saw borders open to Ukrainian refugees. So all of that together can give us a model of what could be.
Right.
Sadly, in 2022, it was not to be. But it is something to hold on to, I think.
Okay, so you do, as you said, you have this idea of what could be done. All the frameworks are there, but these global institutions continue failing and perpetuating the actual injustices themselves.
And it was particularly striking in 2022 because we had this robust response to Russia's aggression of Ukraine and to the multiple war crimes committed against the Ukrainian people. We had that robust response, and therefore the very mediocre or no response at all to the many other crises, such as that of the Palestinian people, that of the Ethiopian people, or indeed that of refugees. Because I think the double standard is particularly marked in our treatment of refugees. Europe welcomed Ukrainian refugees, but turned its back on refugees fleeing similar level of warfare and repression from Ethiopia, from Eritrea, from Afghanistan. The United States welcomed Ukrainian refugees as it should have, but at the same time, it sent back to Haiti 25,000 refugees who had fled violence in Haiti. So 2022 is really, really marked by the double standard and our incapacity as an international community to apply the same rule coherently, consistently to everyone and everywhere.
So let's look at the upside, if we can. I mean, your report very strongly notes how the right to peaceful protest has been suppressed in many countries, but still, where were the areas where you found yourself impressed with how people responded to rights abuses in their home countries?
Well, you know, it's the story of this report and sadly of previous report. Repression never goes unanswered. People rise up to repression as they do rise up to the fact that their standard of living is being curtailed. So in 2022, which was an extraordinarily bad year for inflation, for standard of living, for access to food, for access to energy, in 2022, people rose up. They were fed up.
Right.
They were fed up in Europe. They were fed up in Africa. They were tired of this continuing deterioration of basic needs for their life. They rose up in numbers in Iran against the repression from the government. The women rose up. They rose up because they could not dance. They rose up because they could not sing. They rose up because they could not be human beings. In Afghanistan, women rose up. They rose up because they were prevented from going to work, because they were prevented from going to university. In Peru, indigenous people took to the street because of what was happening at the highest level of the government with their president. In France, people are currently in the street to protest against what they perceive to be an attack on their social and economic rights.
Right.
The world over, people are not taking those attacks and those repression by lying down or sitting down. No, they rose up.
Indeed,
they
and it
demand.
is, I mean, it is so inspiring, especially when you see the bravery in certain countries, you know, particularly Iran, Afghanistan. But as you say, around the world, it seems there's this malaise over, you know, falling standards of living, a deterioration of respect for human rights. Is there anywhere where it's actually gotten better that you can point to and say, this is the right way to do it, this is a model to follow?
Look, we don't we don't create a hierarchy of governments. It's not the way we work. We do highlight in every country entries where things have gotten better and where things have gotten worse. And in many situations around the world, it's never completely a complete contempt for human rights. There will always be something that you can hold on to. If we look at the United States, where, of course, the decision by the Supreme Court there to overturn the right to a safe abortion was really a catastrophe for women's rights. But in response, you have seen many states in the United States defending and protecting the right to an abortion. In Europe, similarly, a number of countries have made the right to safe abortion more difficult, but other countries have, on the contrary, made it more feasible for women to be protected. So, nothing is ever completely a story of decrease.
I imagine it caught you by surprise to see what you would describe, I guess, as regression in the United States. But I mean, even worse, Afghanistan, as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
again becoming a prison for its women. Are there any measures that could be taken to stop that?
Look, there are measures that can be taken. The first one, of course, is that we need to keep denouncing what the Taliban is doing against the woman treated as second-class citizens. The war on women waged by the Taliban must be denounced and must be attacked. Now, what does that mean? It means practically that currently the response of the international community have not been commensurate with the level of violations being committed in Afghanistan. We at Amnesty International have called for a commission of inquiry to be established. What it means is that it will be a commission that will have the mandate to collect and preserve evidence in relation to the multiple violations committed in Afghanistan. That will send a far stronger signal that those violations will not go unpunished than what we are currently doing. And this is why the measures taken by the International Criminal Court in Ukraine, the measures taken by the international community to support justice in Ukraine are so important, because they are sending the right message that no one should be able to escape international justice.
Okay, Agnes Callamard, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you so much for being with us on The Newsmakers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, a key point made in Amnesty's report was a crackdown on the right to protest. And that's what some say is happening in Kenya, where demonstrations continue against President William Ruto and the rising cost of living, despite a ban on protests. Thousands of people have clashed with police on the streets of Nairobi, leaving a second protester dead. On Sunday night, the police inspector general announced a ban on protests, declaring them illegal from that point forward. But opposition leader Raila Odinga, who lost to President Ruto in last August's election, is seeking to channel frustrations about rising inflation into a movement against the president. Now, he has vowed to press ahead with bi-weekly protests every Monday and Thursday, despite the ban. Meanwhile, the president accuses Odinga of trying to cause chaos in a country with a history of political and ethnic violence. Despite Ruto's promises to bring down living costs since taking power in September, inflation has remained high in East Africa's economic powerhouse. In February, the inflation rate rose to 9.2%, and people are angry.
There's a problem. The country is bleeding, and we are really tired. What is going on is not about Odinga. This is about young people. As you can see, 90% of these people are hustlers. And the problem is the government is sending police. This was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration, and you are sending police to shoot us with live bullets, rubber bullets, excessive force. What is this? Look at the police. Look at the police.
We are suffering. I can't even afford even a liter of sugar. Sugar now is even 40 shillings. Last government, I can say, in fact, it was saving us. This government is full of hypocrites. Ruto himself, he used the name hustlers to fool us. He thought we were fools. Now, he can't fulfill his promises.
We are tired of Ruto's government. Ruto should look at the price of maize flour, or else we will continue demonstrating.
Ruto has messed up this country. He has given this country to the wolves. How can normal Mwananchi not afford unga? How can normal Mwananchi not afford sugar? How can normal Mwananchi not afford these basic commodities? We must fight for this country. We must fight for our people. We must fight for our nation. Ruto must go.
But are these protests really about rising costs, or is there a political agenda behind it? Joining me now from Nairobi to debate that are Mairura Ratemo, he's a lawyer and a UDA party youth leader supporting the government. And Catherine Amayi is an eco-feminist and community organizer. Thanks both so much for being with us. You know, there are obviously, as we saw there, legitimate frustrations here, but Jared, you think what's happening in these protests is less about the rising cost of living and injustice and more about the political agenda of Raila Odinga. Explain.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to clarify that the government and the police are not opposed to the demonstrations or protests. It is just that they are opposed to the criminal nature in which these protests are carried out. Secondly, I don't think that the former Prime Minister, leader of opposition, Raila Odinga, is genuine in his quest for, I say, justice. Because former Prime Minister Raila Odinga has vied for presidency 5 times now, and he has lost all those contests. And this time round is the concerns did not happen just yesterday. If it is the cost of living, it has been there. The William Ruto government has just been in office for 6 months. So I think this is a short time to charge their government and start causing chaos. That is, the cost of living is very high.
Mm. So, Catherine, I mean, costs of living are up basically everywhere on the planet. So if Jared's argument is why not give the government more time, because demonstrating now actually hurts the Kenyan people and business.
So now the cost of living, the argument is that the cost of living is high everywhere. But the situation in the country is that we are seeing more resources being pumped upwards. We are seeing an increasing since William, and of course, this is again, of course, something that is not new. Mr. Ruto has been the deputy president for the past 10 years, and of course, he took over power in September. So again, we cannot say that the issue of the cost of living can be divorced from his leadership. There's been clear appointments that these appointments are unnecessary and unconstitutional, and these are people who are being put into office. The chief administrative secretaries, for instance, they're actually going to collect large parks. So for me, that is a serious concern. When we talk about the issue of the cost of living and yet all this money is being pumped into the wealthy and the elite, then that is a problem.
Okay, let me ask you too, Catherine, quickly, because it's being reported that there has been now a ban on protests. Jared was saying there's not a ban on protests. It's actually just about stopping the criminal elements and the vandals that have come out. What do you see it as? Do you think the police are unfairly and against the rights of Kenyans cracking down and trying to stop legitimate peaceful protests?
Absolutely. There is a ban on the protest. We saw the Inspector General of Police announcing on Sunday evening that all the protest was banned, and he released a statement to that effect. So we saw that happening, and of course, when the protesters went to protest, they were met by heavy police and just heavy brutality, really, in general.
Okay, Jared, I mean, there we heard the argument that this is not about, criminality that the police are trying to stop. This is about stopping Kenyans' rights to peaceful protest. I just want you to clarify on why you don't think that is actually the case here.
Our constitution guarantees and allows Kenyans to picket and to demonstrate peacefully. But these rights also, the same constitution says your rights should not infringe on other person's rights. During this protest, as it has been seen before, not only this time, there is a lot of disruption of public property. There is a lot of violence. And I think the Azimio group did not prove enough that their protests were going to be peaceful. That's why the Kenyan police took caution and agreed to not to ban, but just give guidelines on how on how peaceful protests should be done. The Azimio coalition has been asked to give a guideline on how they are going to protest, on how the procession, the way they are going to take. But that one has been, it has not been agreed, and they have not done so. So it is just that the police are cautious enough to protect the many Kenyans who are going about their businesses as usual.
Okay, Catherine, you know, there are complaints that, obviously from government supporters, including like Jared, of course, that it's actually irresponsible to call for protests at this time, knowing the dangers of, you know, thugs that are within the protests and the history itself of the ethnic tension that is in Kenya that can easily turn violent. Do you not think there is an element of that in these protests right now?
Again, I think though it is human nature, of course, for people to come with varied agendas. But what we have repeatedly seen in the case of Kenyan protests is that the police actually infiltrate protesters. They paid people who are supposed to infiltrate the protest, and those people are going to go around looting and vandalizing property, and then of course they'll have to blame it on the protesters. So it is something we've seen in the past. I wouldn't put it past them to have done it now.
Okay, so you think these are agitators that the government has conspired to put inside the protests. What's interesting, though, is that the violence and the, as they're called in Kenya, I think they were called goons in some of the media, kind of seems to be working against both the leaders in this case. Raila Odinga himself had his factory charged and broken into. So do you think those elements then, if you think they are infiltrators, are they both sides doing this to each other?
When we talk about the issue of the vandalism on Raila's property and even the former president Uhuru Kenyatta's property, which was also looted yesterday, we've seen a pattern. In this case, it is very likely that the government actually sponsored those attacks. And so it's clear that the government also has people. I mean, and of course, this is unfortunate because these are young people who are being used badly. We've seen it in the past. We saw how the issue of Mungiki, we had an issue in the past where young people would be sponsored by politicians to go and cause chaos and, of course, to settle political scores. So we are seeing something similar because we saw it 10 years ago, and it seems like it's coming back. So it is clear that these are government-sponsored chaos. Again, yes.
I'd like to get a final answer on this then from both of you. I mean, what, if anything, Jared, do you think these protests will achieve?
I believe that this protest, Raila Odinga has a different agenda or motive about these protests, and his agenda is all known. It has been a script, and it is known before. He is trying to force the government into talks and create a handshake, and he's just trying to get a way to come into government so that the government can find a position for him in the government. So it's not about the common mwananchi really, or the frustration that the mwananchi and high cost of living that mwananchi is going through. Because if it is the case, Raila Odinga will not be going around and pressuring like we should open the servers. That one does not help mwananchi at all at this time.
Okay.
Secondly, I just want to comment on what you said previously. These protests come with a lot of things. Like yesterday, the protests in Kibera turned to be, they turned to bring a tribal element whereby the Nubians and the Luos who live in Kibera at night turned against each other, burning of a church and burning of a mosque. So this is why the police were very cautious against this protest.
Okay. Catherine, then a final answer from you on the question I posed to Jared. What, if anything, do you think these protests will actually achieve?
Okay, again, I'd like to be very clear that I'd be happy to see the protest transcend individuals and personality cults. I support the protesters 100% because their issues are issues of fundamental concern to everybody. The cost of living needs to be addressed. So I do hope that that will be taken seriously by the government. and the issues of the subsidies which have been removed, and the rising cost of electricity and commodities should be well looked into and rectified immediately. Otherwise, it will continue to destabilize the country. Yeah.
Catherine, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank both of you so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.